We say good afternoon to Aidan Harper. Aidan is a spokesperson for the 4-Day Week campaign and a researcher at the New Economics Foundation. And we also say good afternoon to Julian Jessup, Chief Economist at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Aidan, I can't believe my ears with this one, as in, of course we'd all want a 4-day week, but could the country handle it?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on the show. And I mean, there's a series of reasons about how we should move towards shorter hours, and you've already outlined some of them. And I think if we kind of look from like a macroeconomic perspective and look at other examples in other countries, we can see that the likes of the Netherlands, Germany, all of Scandinavia work far fewer hours than us, and yet their economies are more productive and they have stronger economies overall. So I think we can look to those countries and really learn the lessons that they do in terms of working hours and apply them to our own situation here.
So Julian Jessup, we're going to get more for doing less. Do you believe that?
Well, it sounds lovely, doesn't it? I think the key point here is that it's possible that productivity would increase if you work fewer hours, but unless it increases an awful lot, you're going to be producing less overall. The basic math here, if you work, for example, 4 days a week rather than 5, then every hour you're working, you have to produce 25% more in order to be worth as much as your employer. So basically, either you're going to have a massive increase in productivity or somebody else is going to have to pick up the bill. Now, in some areas of the economy, you could increase productivity, but probably not in things like public services. And this is where some of those big numbers come through, the cost of this. Somebody's going to have to pick up the bill. It's either going to be the taxpayer or public servants will be able to do less in the hours available to them, and therefore we will suffer from worse services.
Now, this is a Labour plan, isn't it? And under this new 32-hour working week, which has been put forward by Jeremy Corbyn, the Times has done some investigating and come up with a figure that it would hit us by £17 billion. So a £17 billion hit to the public sector, meaning that it's going to cost us, the taxpayers, a lot of money to introduce that 4-day week.
Can I come back on that point? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. That figure that's being drawn there is very problematic if we look at it. And firstly, it doesn't really address some of the other issues that are affecting public servants, and particularly in education and healthcare, whereby we know there are huge levels of burnout and huge levels of turnover because of overwork. And across our UK economy as a whole, 1 in 4 of all sick days lost last year were a direct result of overwork and the effect that has on mental health. Now, the figures that they've put together there do not take into account the savings that will happen as a result of having a healthier workforce who are taking less time off sick and who aren't leaving the profession because of copious amounts of overwork. But also, really interestingly, the types of arguments levelled against shorter hours are very, very, very similar to the types of arguments that were levelled against the introduction of the minimum wage a good few years ago. And it was all about, what is this going to cost the public purse? What are we going to be paying these people? What's the hit to the economy? And it turns out that all of those predictions were wildly wrong. And actually, paying people more meant people had more money to spend in the economy, which meant that the economy worked better overall.
What, Aidan, if you actually want to work harder, if you actually want to, get on in life, earn more money?
I mean, that's absolutely fine if you want to. I guess this is about having the choice to be able to do that or not do that. So this is really about autonomy here, and your ability to be able to work fewer hours.
You see, Julian, I often think, these political parties, and they throw out these ideas. In particular, Mr. Corbyn is very prone to do this, where he'll say there should be free housing for all, there should be more hospital beds, there should be this, that and the other, all of which it's very hard to disagree with. You say, yes, here, absolutely. Nobody should have to sleep in a hospital corridor. And we're now going to be saying nobody should have to work 5 days or more a week. But how realistic is all of this? Or is it just election talk, do you think?
Well, in one sense, actually, I agree with your other guest. I mean, there are certainly some jobs where more flexibility and working shorter hours would actually be good for the employer and also good for the employee. But if businesses can see that, if it's genuinely the case that having people work shorter hours is good for them and good for their employer, I don't think the government needs to get involved. And that's already what's happening. I mean, the trend in working hours is down. Many more people are now working on flexible contracts. So some people are actually able and willing to work 4 days a week.
So people are apparently working less. If you say the trend in working hours is down, because it feels to me, Eamon, as if people are working harder than ever just to sometimes put the basics on the table.
I mean, well, we see in our industry people who work harder for less or the same money that they've been having, but, whatever.
There was a really interesting study done in August. Microsoft Japan experimented with this, and it boosted their productivity, Julian, by 40%. So your argument about, well, you'd have to have, 20 to 25% increase in productivity to make this worth it, according to their research, 40%, which seems a lot, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's no doubt that there are some companies, maybe even some sectors, where you could get very large increases in productivity. Particularly those where you could use more technology to make each individual worker produce more in a given hour. But those are very much the exceptions. Across the economy as a whole, I think it's going to be extremely difficult, particularly things like public services. I mean, doctors, for example, are doctors really going to be able to treat 40% or even 25% more people in a given time? Clearly not. I think also in those areas where it is possible to boost productivity, then companies can do that themselves. They don't need any incentive from government. This isn't necessarily something that should be driven by the state. If it's in the interests of workers and their employers to work shorter, more flexible hours, that will happen in any event.
Does this then penalise the self-employed person, Aidan? If we're looking at this realistic, it's all very good for public sector workers, and I agree they're under a lot of stress. But what about someone who's decided to set up their own business in these challenging times?
I mean, those who are self-employed and who are setting up their own businesses do have a series of issues as it is. I don't think there are the structures in our economy and our society at this moment in time to support those who are in self-employment. But what's really interesting about arguments for the shorter working week, when productivity cannot be increased to the extent that you are reducing working time, you do have to produce new jobs. That's not necessarily a bad thing because you're producing new, well-paid, secure jobs. And in an economy where we know we have lots of self-employed people who are underemployed, who are underpaid and in insecure work, for example, the gig economy, those working for Deliveroo, Uber, etc., the opportunity to open up new, full-time, well-paid, secure jobs on something like a 4-day week opens up opportunities for people to move from low-paid, insecure work into those jobs. So there's a variety of ways in which a shorter working week can impact on people across the economy, both from those who are overworked, but also those who are underworked as well. And that's a really important thing to take into account here.
Well, we still can't get away from the fact, Aidan, that it's estimated it would cost the taxpayer at least £17 billion a year because of the impact on the public sector wage bill alone.
Well, as I've said, those figures drawn from that are very problematic, not least because they do not look at the positive effects of moving towards shorter hours, particularly when looking at things like healthcare and education, where current levels of overwork are costing the taxpayer a hell of a lot of money. Actually, moving people towards shorter hours, looking after their mental health, means that they will get sick less and turnover will decrease. So people will be moving out the profession at a lesser rate than they currently are. So it would be saving, in many cases, saving the taxpayer money here. It's not a simple, this is the cost of it on the wage bill. There are a series of other factors at play here. And there will be a series of savings from the effect
I'll ask both of you, is this just pie in the sky? Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are listening to this and thinking as if that is likely to happen. Julian, how likely is this to happen?
Well, it's more likely to happen if you have a flexible labour market where people have more choice about the terms and conditions of their employment. It's unlikely to happen if the government wades in and regulates for a shorter working week. I mean, that's, for example, what happened in France. And I think most people, including those who are advising the Labour Party, would agree that that's been a bad thing. It's actually been counterproductive, particularly for public services. Okay,
gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.
Can I come back on that? Sorry, very quickly. So the literature around what happened in France is very, very contested, and there were 2 laws passed there. And actually, there are a lot of people who say that the working week reduction to a 35-hour week in France is a very positive thing. And I think there is a place for the state to step in and, for example, create new holidays over a period of time so that there's a steady, managed transition towards shorter hours. This is exactly the types of arguments that we use against the introduction of the 2-day weekend and the 8-hour day. We won those. We can move towards a 4-day week, and we can begin that transition now.